Good afternoon, my name is Glen Hayward, the proud owner of Good Works Auto Repair in sunny Tempe, Arizona. And today we're going to talk about this car just above my head here. It's a 1996 27-year-old Ford Thunderbird with the 3.8 liter regular gas fuel injected engine in it. And this gentleman came in, he said that he owned this car, I guess since it was new, and he had a problem with the engine overheating. And when we looked at his cooling system, which we'll look at in just a minute, I'm going to show you what happens when you overheat an engine and you drive it for a while with it overheating. Here's the oil drain plug right here, and when I take this out you're going to see both oil and water come out. That gooey mess right there, this is oil mixed with antifreeze. It looks very murky, very mucky, and kind of whitish caramel looking oil that's coming out of this vehicle. That's because the antifreeze, when the head gaskets blew, the coolant from the cooling system got into the oil and started mixing it, and it makes this murky mess right here. Unfortunately, in order to fix this problem, and we don't know what initiated it, whether the water pump started leaking and it depleted the coolant to a degree where the engine started overheating, blew the head gaskets, or whether the head gaskets gave out because it's 27 years old. We don't know which came first, the chicken or the egg, but this engine, this vehicle, has only got 86,000 original miles on it. So in 27 years, it's only been driven a couple thousand miles a year. So there's a good chance that this car was never serviced properly, and that's why Good Works Auto Repair, we really stress doing regular preventative maintenance on your vehicle, because you can prevent what happened to this motor. He's going to spend thousands of dollars now to take the cylinder heads off of this, probably have to replace his radiator because it's so plugged up with muck that he's going to have to replace the radiator, pay for that parts and labor, the parts and labor of doing that, and send the heads out to a machine shop to make sure that in the process of getting overheated, the heads didn't warp. Because you can put new gaskets over those old heads without doing any kind of machining on them, and you may end up with the same problem again. So we have to take the cylinder heads off, replace the head gaskets and the head bolts, because the bolts are called stretch bolts. And once they're stretched, you can't reuse them again. Otherwise, again, you're going to create the same problem that it originally came in for. So this is the lower radiator hose, which still has some fluid coming out. But if you look, you see there's a spring inside of it that keeps the hose from collapsing. And you can see all of the muck that's wrapped around that spring. So it is highly apparent to me that these radiator hoses, which have the original factory clamps, and also it says RAD, which means this is the radiator side. So these hoses in 27 years have never been changed on this vehicle, and it's highly probable that this cooling system has never been flushed out, and thus the muck, the mire, everything that's inside of there. I'm going to see if I can get my finger in there. So this is what happens to coolant. If you look at my finger right there, this little brick that I just pulled out of there, this is coolant that is actually hardened. These little particulates, your radiator is made up of many cores where the fluid, the coolant flows through there. And in just a minute, I'll be right back, and I'm going to lower the car down. We're going to take a look from the radiator cap side into the radiator. All right, so the vehicle's now lowered down to a place where we can see it. So here's the entire engine. So the cylinder heads are underneath. These are the valve covers, and under here is the cylinder head. So the exhaust has got to come off. These have to come off. The entire intake has to come off, and everything that's bolted on the front of this engine has to come off in order to allow those cylinder heads to come off. So as you can see, it's a big job. It's probably about a 13 or 14-hour job to take these apart and then put everything back together with the new gaskets and bolts and seals and everything else that it needs. So the radiator, as I was pointing out before we took our little pause there, if you look down in here, you can see how much sludge and crud is down inside of this radiator. And you can imagine all of this guck that I'm going to try to see if I can scrape a little out. All this guck here that's on my fingers is inside that radiator and trying to make its way through these narrow, thin aluminum tubes that go through there and make their way back to the engine and be recirculated, be heated, and then cooled again by the cooling fan, which is up here in the front of the engine, electric fan. So again, we don't know about the operation. Maybe the fan failed, maybe the water pump was leaking, or maybe just all of the guck that's in the radiator plugged it up to the point where the engine could no longer cool itself and therefore overheated and did a lot of damage. So this radiator will have to be replaced because there's no way to take these plastic tanks off of here, clean out the rods that go through there, the passageways that allow the coolant to flow. So that is another part and labor job. Doing the heads and head gaskets and head bolts is another labor job. And then the other labor job is fixing the brakes and flushing all of that nasty fluid out of there and so on, because again, we don't know how long any of these conditions existed. It does appear at one point that this upper radiator hose was replaced because it's got a label on it, but it was probably too much work for someone to take the lower one off, because it is the original equipment hose that Ford installed on this at the factory. So again, much needed regular maintenance. These hoses should have been replaced at 60,000 miles or 8 years. That is the maximum that these hoses are made to last, because the interior of the hose starts to deteriorate. The hoses swell or they become hard and they can tear loose. So it's really important. Preventative maintenance, fluids, hoses, belts. You know, when your belt starts to fray or your belt starts to crack, and this is a serpentine belt, this one's been replaced. There's no cracks or anything in this belt. Now that is a maintenance item that stares you in the face and it's obvious, but some of the things that are on your car that need that required maintenance aren't just staring you in the face. Besides it being in terrible condition, and this tube that is supposed to come out of this thing, which isn't there, is broken off. There's the portion of the tube where you see the circle getting a little bit smaller in there, so that kind of trashed this pump. And then you look at this thing now. Again, we talked about maintenance and the importance of maintenance, so you can see that this obviously hasn't been changed. And over here on the motor itself, this is where that motor pump, the water pump sits. And so you can see there's like stalagmites and stalactites growing in there. And I'm sure that they're all the way through the whole motor block. So we're just going to put on this brand new water pump. This is what the water pump is supposed to look like when it's new. And this spins and this moves the water. The belt runs this side of it here and spins, and it moves the water and circulates it from the radiator through the block and back through the radiator again. So once again, maintenance, maintenance, maintenance. Get your coolant changed, keep your oil changed, go to a quality shop and make sure that they're taking care of your maintenance items. And always, 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 when you go to any shop, make sure that they're not taking any shortcuts, or that they're charging you for stuff that they're not really doing, and that they're making you aware of any possible consequences from not doing some of the other things that absolutely need to be done along with this job. So once again, Glen at Good Works Auto Repair in sunny Tempe, Arizona. Thank you for joining us for another episode of Under the Hood.